Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding for the arrival of Her Excellency the Honourable Linda Dessau, Governor of Victoria, and Mr Anthony Howard QC.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Your Excellency, I invite you to present the honours and awards in the Order of Australia. To be officers in the General Division, Dr Graham Leslie Blackman, for distinguished service to the pharmaceutical industry, to scientific research and policy development, to theological education and the Anglican Church of Australia, and to aged care. The Honourable John Mansfield Brumby, for distinguished service to the Parliament of Victoria, to economic management and medical biotechnology innovation, to improved rural and regional infrastructure, and to the community. The Honourable Stephen Pendrell Charles, for distinguished service to the law and to the judiciary, particularly in the areas of commercial arbitration and mediation, to judicial administration and to legal professional organisations. Professor David Jamie Cooper, for distinguished service to intensive care medicine in the field of traumatic brain injury as a clinician and to medical education as an academic, researcher and author. Professor Mark Emmanuel Cooper, for distinguished service to biomedical research in the field of diabetes and related renal and cardiovascular diseases, to medical education and as a mentor of young scientists. Professor Jane Elizabeth Den Hollander, for distinguished service to tertiary education through a range of executive, administration and advisory roles as a supporter of professional educational organisations and to the community. Ms Helen Norma Evans, for distinguished service to global health as an advocate for the improved treatment of infectious diseases in underprivileged populations, particularly for women and children. Mr Ahmed Fahour, for distinguished service to business, particularly in the area of postal communications, to the banking and investment sectors, and as a supporter of improved multicultural relations. Professor Patricia Ann Grimshaw, for distinguished service to the social sciences and to the humanities through researching, documenting and preserving Australian history and the roles of women in society. Ms. Mary Patricia Hemming, for distinguished service to community health as a leader and consultant in the development of therapeutic and pharmaceutical guidelines nationally and internationally. Professor Ian William Johnston, for distinguished service to engineering as an academic, researcher, practitioner and consultant, particularly in the fields of structural foundation engineering and geothermal energy. To be members in the General Division: Dr. Noel Amy Alpins, for significant service to ophthalmology, particularly to the development of innovative refractive surgery techniques and to professional associations. Professor John Charles Altman, for significant service to tertiary education as a researcher and administrator, and to the social sciences and to Indigenous economic policy. Mr. Dennis Thomas Bagley, for significant service to public administration in Victoria through infrastructure project management and to veterans and their families. Mr. Kevin Christopher Bailey, for significant service to Australia-Timor-Leste relations, to philanthropic organisations, to the financial planning sector and to the community. Dr. Vaughan Rodney Beck, for significant service to engineering, to tertiary education, administration and research, and to professional academies. The Honourable Justice Kevin Harcourt Bell, for significant service to the law and to the judiciary, to native title and human rights, and to the community. Ms. Margaret McVeigh Bertley, for significant service to cultural heritage, particularly to the museum sector, to education and to historical preservation. Professor Gillian Ann Blackmore, for significant service to education as an academic and administrator, to social justice and equity, and to policy reform. Emeritus Professor Sydney Block, for significant service to medicine in the field of psychiatry, to medical education as an academic and author, and as a mentor and role model. Mr. John William Burdett, for significant service to community health through executive roles with medical research institutes and to the finance sector. Dr. Noel Arthur Burley, for significant service to the community through social welfare initiatives, to engineering and to scientific research and development. Emeritus Professor Sanford Delbridge Clark, for significant service to the law, to the development of water management and legislation, and to legal education. Mr. John Matthew Corcoran, for significant service to the law and to the legal profession through a range of executive roles and to the community. Mr. John Ernest Dainton, for significant service to conservation and the environment through natural resource management and to the dairy industry. Ms. Claire Elizabeth Dobbin, for significant service to the motion picture industry, particularly to national and international film festivals, through education and to screenwriting. Mr. Robin Heath Fildes, for significant service to athletics, particularly through executive roles with leading administrative bodies, to business and to the community. Adjunct Professor Barry Goanna Golding, for significant service to tertiary education as a researcher and author, to professional organisations and to the community. Dr. John Timothy Kennedy, for significant service to medicine, particularly in the field of otolaryngology, to medical education and training, and to the community. Mr. Alan Raymond Kincaid, for significant service to medical administration at the state and national level, particularly through financial management and executive roles. Mr. Stephen Philip Knott, for significant service to the resources and energy industries, to the advancement of women and to industrial relations. To receive the Conspicuous Service Cross, Sergeant Craig Allen Barnes, for outstanding achievement as Combat Control Team Assault Zone Survey Specialist at No. 4 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force. To receive the Public Service Medal, Professor Michael John Ackland, for outstanding public service through contributions to the health and well-being of people in Victoria. Ms. Marie Amanda Cameron, for outstanding public service to residential aged care standards and improved quality of life for older persons in Victoria. Dr. Robin Anthony Hurst, for outstanding public service through the development of community engagement with the museum and galleries sector in Victoria. To receive the Australian Police Medal for Distinguished Police Service, Assistant Commissioner Deborah Joan Abbott. Commander Susan Mary Clifford. Assistant Commissioner Peter Ross Gunther. To receive the Australian Fire Service Medal for Distinguished Fire Service, Mr. Anthony Reginald Archer. Mr. Henry Charles Barton. Mr. William Bowery. Ms. Kendra Leanne Dean. Mr. Gregory James Kennedy. Mr. Paul Leslie King. To receive the Ambulance Service Medal for Distinguished Ambulance Service, Mr. Harry Ernest Brindley. Mrs. Glenys Marion Chapman. Mr. Colin Jones. To receive the Medal of the Order of Australia in the General Division, Mr. Robert Henry Askew, for service to local government and to the community of Warrnambool. Mr. Stephen Edward Barmforth, for service to the environment. Ms. Catherine Louise Beaufort, for service to radiotherapy, to international relations and to sailing. Ms. Marilyn K. Beaumont, for service to the community, particularly to women's health. Mrs. Elizabeth Gay Bennett for service to the community of Spring Bay. Captain Donald Beresford Bergman for service to veterans and their families and to the community. Mr. Alexander John Carmody for service to youth and to medical and emergency service organisations. Mrs. Thelma Castles for service to the community through charitable organisations. The late Mr. Donald Brian Chambers to be received by Mr. Simon Chambers in recognition of his service to local government and to the community of Victoria. Ms. Jeanette Dawn Chantry for service to local government and to the community of Moonee Valley. Mr. Warren Alfred Cole for service to the community through social welfare organisations. Mr. Brian William Cossar for service to veterans and their families and to the community. Mr. Stuart Trevor Coots for service to the community of Benalla. Mr. Alistair Mark Cox for service to orchestral and choral music. Mr. Andrew Niven Creek for service to business, particularly to the domestic gas industry. Mrs. Ruth Evelyn Crofts for service to community history and heritage preservation. Ms. Anne Winifred Cronin for service to community health and to medical research organisations. Mr. Heath Arthur Davidson for service to sport as a gold medalist at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Mr. Bernard Carl Dingle for service to military history. Mr Timothy Malcolm Diskin for service to sport as a gold medalist at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Mrs Philomena Antoinette Doherty for service to the community through a range of organisations. Dr Meredith Ann Doig for service to the community, to higher education and to business. Mr John Francis Donegan for service to sport and to the community of Casterton. Mr Vedran Drakulic for service to the community through a range of charitable organisations. Mrs Pamela Ann Dunlop for service to sheepdog trialling and to the community. Mr Benjamin John Fawcett for service to sport as a gold medalist at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Mr Simon Brett Finney for service to the community through children's medical organisations. The late Mr Wayne Stanley Fisher, to be received by Mrs Heather Fisher, in recognition of his service to veterans and their families. Mr Michael Noel Ganger for service to the community through children's charitable organisations. Mr Athol David Graham for service to the community of Benalla. Mr Kazimierz Greszak for service to the Polish community of Victoria. Mrs Jennifer Gibson Happel for service to the community through voluntary roles with horticultural organisations. Mrs Eleanor Joy Hardy for service to aviation through administrative roles. Mrs Irene Phyllis Harrington for service to the community through a range of roles. Mr Thomas John Heaney for service to the community of Benalla. Mrs Dawn Lorraine Heffernan for service to education and to the community. Mr Neville Maxwell Heffernan for service to education and to the community. Mr Alexander John Hare for service to the broadcast media, particularly through community radio. Mr Darren Franz Hellman for service to the community of Wyndham through a range of sporting clubs. Mr Peter Donald Hitchener for service to the broadcast media as a journalist and television presenter and to the community. Mr Charles Holkner for service to the community through support for a range of organisations. Dr David Barry Holloway for service to military history organisations. Mr Ivan Ackland Holt for service to the community through roles with social welfare organisations. Ms Anne Margaret Horrigan Dixon for service to the community of Fitzroy and through support for refugees. Mr Mackenzie James Horton for service to sport as a gold medalist at the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. Mr Peter John Inge for service to the community, to charitable organisations and to aged care. Mr Keith Lindsay Irvine for service to community health through a range of volunteer roles and to social welfare organisations. Mr Roland Elias Jabour for service to commerce and industry and to Australian-Arab relations. Sister Mary Kavanagh for service to education and to the Presentation Sisters in Victoria. Mr John Warner Knowles for service to aged care delivery in Victoria. Mrs Karen Lee Kornhauser for service to the community through a range of organisations. Mr Matt Franklin Lewis for service to sport as a gold medalist at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. Mr Jaden Daniel Warne for service to sport as a gold medalist at the Rio 2016 Paralympic Games. To receive the commendation for distinguished service, Lieutenant Colonel Damien Leslie Green for distinguished performance of duties in warlike operations as a mentor and Deputy Senior National Representative at the Afghanistan National Army Officer Academy from September 2014 to July 2015. Your Excellency, that concludes the investiture. I invite you to address us.
Thank you. Ms Judith Grayley, Parliamentary Secretary for Education, representing the Premier, the Honourable Chief Justice Marilyn Warren, Lieutenant Governor of Victoria, Mr David Hodgett, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, representing the Leader of the Opposition, representatives of the Armed Services, Victorian Commissioners, Duncan Stalker, Deputy Chair of the Order of Australia Association for Victoria, other distinguished guests, honours recipients, ladies and gentlemen. Well, first I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathering, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and any elders who are with us today. Tony and I are absolutely delighted to welcome you all to this investiture ceremony. I must say that of all the wonderful and interesting aspects of the role of the Governor, the privilege of investing Australian honours is indeed a particularly special and uplifting one. To put that into context, let me briefly explain the four main parts of this role. The Governor, as the representative of the Head of State, is the guardian of the State Constitution on behalf of all Victorians, ensuring that our democratic processes are safeguarded. The Governor performs an extensive community role across the state, bringing people together and highlighting, encouraging and facilitating the good work of Victorians in their businesses, professional, cultural, sporting and caring contributions to our community. My husband and I both particularly relish this community role because it enables us to meet a broad range of people and to see a huge variety of clever and innovative organisations, institutions and community groups. There's the international engagement aspect, both here and abroad, a part of the role that in a global environment is vital to our state's economic, cultural and social well-being. But it's the remaining part of the role, the ceremonial part, that sees the Governor presiding over Australia Day and Anzac Day and sees me today with the privilege of investing you with your well-deserved Australian honours. It really is a privilege to have the opportunity to recognise all of you who give so much, and it is genuinely a pleasure to have the chance to say thank you. In our busy world, we can often fail to pause long enough to simply say, well done. But it is important to highlight your good work for other reasons too, and that's because it inevitably inspires others. By hearing about your achievements, others will realise the difference that they too can make, whether by striving well beyond the normal expectations of their vocational lives or by giving selflessly within their local communities. All that said, I suspect that there are many amongst you today who nevertheless feel uncomfortable as the sole focus of this attention. I know that you'll be quick to praise all those around you, those who've worked with you, those with whom you live, or those who supported you in your achievements. And certainly, your gratitude to your colleagues, your families, and your friends is not misplaced. It's rare for anyone to reach the heights that you have reached without great support in both the endeavour itself and from the people around you. But may I urge you to allow yourselves at least this occasion today to relax into the celebration of your particular efforts. Accept the recognition, enjoy the accolades, you've earned them, and there is truly every reason for each one of you to feel proud. You've made an exceptional contribution to your communities and in many instances well beyond, including beyond our own shores. I like how the former US President Barack Obama put it recently in his farewell address to his nation, when he said, "So you see, that's what our democracy demands. It needs you, not just when there's an election, not just when your own narrow interest is at stake, but over the full span of a lifetime. If something needs fixing, then lace up your shoes and do some organising. Show up, dive in, stay at it." Well, you've all shown up, you've all dived in, and you've all stayed at it. And as such, you've enriched our country and, of course, our state and every corner of it. You're recognised for that today in all the different fields and forms that your cleverness, your generosity, hard work and altruism have taken. We also thank those who've supported you, many of whom I know are with you today and many of whom I hope are watching over the live link. And we thank those in particular who took the initiative, the time and the trouble to nominate you for these awards. May I urge everyone here today to follow in their footsteps, ensuring that we nominate worthy women as well as men, those born overseas as well as those born here, and those from every field of endeavour and every part of our state. The more our individual honours reflect who we are, the more we are enriched as a community. Thank you, and please enjoy the rest of your time at Government House this morning. Thank you.